Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Kennedy Harwood. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a painting student in the College of Fine Arts, and this is my Keystone project, What We Write, and it's about handwriting in artist practices, sort of how it emerges as a tool for process. So this is my project timeline here and kind of an outline of what we're going to talk about today. In this presentation, I'll discuss the various events that are associated with the project. This includes the sketchbook chats, which I hosted in the Visual Arts Library, interviews that I conducted with student artists, the exhibition that I curated in Boston University's own Gallery 5, and the book, which is hopefully in some of your hands now. So to start out, the inspiration for this project really came about from some initial research into different archival collections of handwriting. But as I was conducting that preliminary stage of research, I realized that there's a much more interesting and sort of immediate resource for me in my own community of looking at the students around me who are also using handwriting in their process. I became really interested in answering questions about how handwriting functions as a tool for artists to externalize ideas as a sort of preparatory process in art making. But I really uncovered so much more than just this preparatory work in my conversations with other students. So the first kind of event that I sort of want to get into, some lovely photos here of the very first sketchbook chat, which was last November. I wanted to facilitate different discussions in a group setting rather than only getting these individual perspectives in interviews. I invited all SVA students across majors, across class years, to come into the library and talk about handwriting and process. At these events, I would give students some information about my own research, about my own interests, about the project at large, and the opportunities that it presented for people to be included in the book, for people to be included in the exhibition, and have these sort of individual features through the interviews. But mainly what we did was have discussions about our process, about how we were bringing handwriting into our studio, and most commonly that was through the sketchbook. I was really excited and honored, thrilled that people were so open to having these kinds of discussions, and that we sort of had this impromptu pile form. At the very first session, people were really excited and really open to sharing these sort of really intimate documents of our studio practices, passing them around, and you can see how close people are getting. So in addition to these group conversations, again, there were 3 of those events held throughout this last school year. I also did individual interviews with people. I have some samples here. These are some of the interviews in the book in these next couple slides, and really I just selected people who have sort of exceptional use of handwriting in their practices. So this here is some work from Grace Giordano, a grad student. She uses note cards actually as a way to collect, organize, and physicalize these different found pieces of text that she finds from her reading or from her daily conversations, and she uses them as a way to bring that text in the studio. They manifest on the paintings. You can see an example here, both on the surfaces and on the edges of these paintings, and having them on this note card, she noted, is like really helpful to move them around the studio and have a physical source of that text being present that is mobile instead of in a sketchbook. Here's Anthony Venturi's little interview here. He thinks of writing a lot like painting and sculpture. He considers words in the same way that we think of form in painting, in forms of shape, color, that there's these repeatable sort of motifs that we can bring in to convey an overall effect. He regularly takes trips out to do plein air paintings and takes notes in little composition notebooks, small moleskins, about his observations out there. Abby Kenny is another grad student that I interviewed, who has a really rigorous approach to painting. She has very complex processes with acrylic paint, which require a lot of pre-planning to make sure that all of her layers get laid down correctly, that there's a nice sense of depth. And she's taken interest lately, you may have seen these in the recent thesis exhibition, in reproducing her grandmother's handwriting in painting and sort of a metaphysical investigation into what it is like to reproduce another person's forms in letters in these larger scale paintings of her grandmother's recipes. So as I kind of teased at before, from these conversations I had with individual artists, as well as the conversations that I had through the sketchbook chats, I sort of realized that every person has a really unique approach to handwriting, and it shows up in lots of different ways. It isn't always just that preparatory, like, what am I going to lay down first? What are my interests? And how am I getting started? People are also finding ways to integrate handwriting within the process or using handwriting really directly as a subject matter even. The major conclusion of my sort of research question about what the role of handwriting is in artist practices is that artists are really uniquely capable of using handwriting as a way to externalize our thoughts, because we're already sort of accustomed to going through this process of having an artistic idea and having to externalize it in other forms, and that handwriting, like sketching, is a sort of low-pressure way to get out ideas, work through new concepts, and sort of document the evolution of a new body of work. So I encourage also that you take a deeper look at the books going around. There are 37 student artists featured. Their handwriting is all documented there in the book. Next, to get to the exhibition was actually in January and February of this year. It was up for 3 weeks. I wanted to give a more public display to this research, as well as give a platform for the student artists in my community. You know, this is a line on your CV. I had a gallery exhibition. I'm published in a book, and I really wanted to make those opportunities for the people around me. I showed not only finished paintings, finished sculptures, but I did also have a vitrine here with people's sketchbooks in them directly. I also framed facsimiles of people's handwriting in sketchbooks and really set them at equals with the paintings and sculptures that was in the show to spark discussions about the importance of all stages of process, not just those normal, final, finished products that we see. As you guys all know, I made this book. It's hopefully going around still. This will also be available to flip through at the reception at the end of this evening. So again, this documents all of the events and the interviews which I've talked about, the exhibition, as a kind of lasting platform for people to have this community together in conversation, in permanent dialogue about what our school looks like at this moment in time and how people are using handwriting and talking about process at this moment in time at the School of Visual Arts. I also have my own research essays, which I've only sort of teased here about handwriting and my sort of conclusions in having these conversations with other people, as well as the importance of community. Most recently, actually last night, we had the little book launch for this. It was really lovely in the library. I don't have photos of it because these were slides due on Monday, but you can see here in the library, I have this mini exhibition of my own handwriting and my own process to try to let people in a little bit and also show, you know, how this book really emerged. On the far left, you can see my sketchbook from my very early planning stages, and then on the far right, I have another sketchbook with my notes from the interviews, which I was taking handwritten notes the entire time. So I really wanted to find a way to also showcase my own work, because I was sort of taking a step back and letting other people's work shine in the rest of the project. And again, I think that in addition to my findings on handwriting, the other research sort of essay in the book was actually about community building. Ended up being a much longer essay. I sort of found that in the research, much of the work that I was doing was really about bringing a community together and about getting people across class years and majors, like I've talked about, to be in dialogue and talk about process. I found that in my early years here at BU, I wasn't really in conversation with people outside my major, outside of painting, and I certainly wasn't in conversation with people who were even a year above or below me. And this project really presented an opportunity for all of us to come together, both in the library and in the exhibition space, and now in this lasting memory, for us to be in conversation with each other and continue making opportunities for one another. So thank you all very much for listening to my project. I'd be happy to take any questions now.
Thank you, Kennedy. This is so cool, and I feel like I've had the privilege of seeing it in process, which has also been, I feel very fortunate to have had that. But something that I was just thinking about is like how socially I think our relationship to handwriting is changing, just with technology, and like I still write a lot of handwritten to-do lists, for example, which has like such a different feel than like using Google Calendar. But have you thought at all about like how I think handwriting is kind of falling out of practice at large in this project?
Yeah, that was one of the major sort of impetuses for the beginning of this project, was that, especially with the largest cohort at the School of Visual Arts being graphic design, there's definitely a feeling of the physical and these sort of analog ways of making going out of fashion or not being as relevant, and bringing attention to the ways in which people are using them organically felt like a way to say, like, this is still important to us, and this is a fertile ground for art making, even if it isn't always on view. And I think giving it that platform too, sort of reiterating the importance of handwriting. I mean, across fields, it's a really productive way to generate ideas and work through things physically rather than like in a typed way. But thank you for that question.
Following on that, actually, throughout this process, have you had a chance to, or have you considered potential ways in which this expressive, experimental method can be integrated into liberal arts education or pedagogic models? Because it looks like it could be, I mean, following on that, like in a world where classrooms are inundated with like laptops, iPads, smartphones, it seems like it could have some.
Yeah, I absolutely feel like those implications are very present in just the idea of handwriting as a tool for thinking. And I didn't necessarily consider like so specifically how that might show up in other curricula. But one thing I think maybe is worth noting is that a lot of people who showed up to the sketchbook chats brought up that it was in fact our curriculum at SVA which brought about such a strong use of handwriting. There's a program that we do abroad in Venice, and so many people cited that, including myself. I didn't use a sketchbook before I went to that program, and many people had the same experience, and I think there definitely is an opportunity for people to foster that within a classroom space, that this is a valid way of knowledge production and thinking through ideas, yeah.
So it was really cool to see kind of the tangible changes that you made to the community at SVA. And I was really curious about where you saw this project continuing into the future, how you see that community being built or maintained, whether in SVA, outside of it, just where you see the future of this project.
Yeah. It was really lovely last night to invite everyone back into the library space and to Kilachand gave me enough funding that I could get enough copies of the book for everyone who was part of the project to have one, which was amazing. And it was so great to see people come back to that space and be together. And I really do feel this sense of community in the School of Visual Arts that I didn't feel before, that there are people talking, particularly like the bridge between the undergrads and the grads was not something that I thought was possible before. And my advisor, Dana, is in the audience right now and has spoken to this sort of dramatic change in the sense of collaboration and making opportunities for one another. One thing I was really excited about is that there's actually a graduate cohort. They call themselves Ramp Collective, and they've mounted not one but 2 exhibitions in succession that include both grads and undergrads, which they were just previously doing shows of grad work, but now they are actively inviting undergraduates to also participate in this together. And I think that's really a testament to the sort of lasting impact of a project like this, is that this might just be the start of some conversations, but it's also equipping people with the sort of language and like this model of event hosting and exhibition creation that can be replicated and will continue that sense of community beyond my time here.
Thank you. That was fantastic. It's great to see how this has turned out. I'm wondering if there are things that you noticed as you were moving materials and your research across forms. So from conversations where you were looking with other people at these materials to the exhibition to the book, are there things that popped out in one format or juxtaposition of materials that you hadn't noticed otherwise?
Yeah. One thing that I think was really important that I wanted to highlight in these slides as well is that in those sketchbook chats, people's openness and willingness to share that really private place of formulating ideas was like sort of surprising to me that people were that willing to do it. And in my original conception of the exhibition, I wasn't actually intending to show the sketchbooks beyond what was in this glass case, but it wound up being such a fruitful ground for conversation, and that it was a sort of through line where you could see where a project began and then also where it finished by showing both the preparatory work and the finished work, that I did decide to have those facsimiles mounted on the walls next to the work, and not necessarily immediately next to each other either, sort of across the space. So people were sort of noticing these little Easter eggs of like, oh, this painting actually came from that drawing I saw on the other side of the room. And yeah, that was a sort of unexpected source of, mostly that I just was so pleased that people were willing to share that openly, these sort of private spaces. Thank you.